Good afternoon. Okay, Del Christensen asked me to do this, and I was both excited and a little scared. I was excited because I have been looking at winter injury since the Great Freeze of February 1989, which I'm sure most of you aren't aware of because the Great Freeze of 1989, February, by the way, early February, was in Washington and Montana. And then after the freeze in 1990, I decided I wanted to study cold hardiness in trees because I saw in three growing seasons in the Walla Walla Valley on the Washington-Oregon border, we had winter injury 2 winters. And there were so many questions. I wanted to learn about it. So I'm excited because I've been studying this for almost 30 years. I'm scared because after 30 years, I still don't feel like I know anything. Winter injury is in trees is a very complex topic. So when we talk about winter injury, it's the same as frost injury, anything else. Basically, we are talking about rupturing the cells. Actually, it's a little more complicated than rupturing the cells. We're talking about rupturing the cell membrane. Because when you look at a plant, a living plant cell, it's divided into 2 distinct areas. There's inside the cell membrane, and that is where everything that you're interested goes on. That is where photosynthesis goes on. That's where proteins are synthesized. Everything happens inside this. Of the plant is going to be inside that cell membrane. The rest of that is going to be the extracellular space. And that includes the cell wall, and that also includes a fair amount of liquids that are outside there. So, I'm going into science, but I think this is really important. Because what happens when you have winter injury, any kind of freezing injury, is that cell membrane breaks. And when that happens, the contents inside that cell membrane leak out, and we see that all the time. We get discoloration as the most common symptom of any kind of frost or freeze injury. That's because those cell membranes are no longer holding all of the proteins and all of the organelles that are important. So this is also important because I always like to classify every plant tissue as cold tolerant, or frost tolerant, or frost sensitive. And a frost sensitive plant cannot handle any kind of freezing in the tissue. So if you get a little bit of frost right here on a frost sensitive plant, that cell membrane breaks, and it's something that we've all seen. We see it unfortunately, we've seen it quite a few springs. Also, when we leave our pumpkins out a little too long, and then everything collapses. So frost sensitive, like a tomato, is a great example. Any kind of ice forming in the tissue, everything dies. But we're talking about fruit trees. Fruit trees are frost tolerant. And but what happens here is we can get ice forming on the outside of the cell membrane. And we've seen that all this winter. I don't know if any of you have been pruning when it was below freezing. I'm sure some of you have. And the plant is still, the plant is completely frozen, but it's still very much alive. And I like to emphasize this because during the acclimation process, which is, I'll go into a little bit of detail, it's a very complicated process. One of the things that happens is that intercellular area shrinks. It becomes smaller and smaller, and then the extracellular space becomes larger and larger. So, and then we get a warm spell like last weekend. Oh, okay. My animation didn't work. And then that thing will grow. But acclimation is really important. And with the acclimation, that means that the cell can handle colder and colder temperatures before those cells die. And we're still learning a lot about this. So when we're talking about winter injury, there's a great handout, by the way, from Fruit Growers News about winter injury. I just read it, really liked it. There they say the best temperatures for winter acclimation, from where you can go to a really sensitive plant to one that can handle 20 below, is in the mid-20s. I put 20 to 32. And there's several steps. Obviously, 32 is going to be much better than 40. Again, so we have this freezing temperature, and with these freezing temperature, these little cells become smaller and smaller. Oh, there we go. There's my animation, and that's what happened last weekend. So unfortunately, your plants aren't real. I don't know what your plants are doing right now, but so that's acclimation. And one of the critical things with acclimation is if the overnight temperature is above 32, if it's above freezing, that's when we start to get really significant deacclimation in the winter. That's one of the things I've observed over the years, that nighttime temperature. It can be 50 degrees. That's not a big deal, but you get 2 or 3 nights above freezing, and then everything becomes a lot more susceptible. Going back to 1989, there were 2 overnight lows at the end of January above 50. That's why there was so much damage that year. Unfortunately, we can't always tell exactly what's going on, but we do know that overnight lows above 50 followed by a sudden drop to 0 degrees is hard on the plants. But the other thing too, I like to emphasize this cell, and I'll be talking about the cells, because in order for the cells to survive, they have to be healthy. In order to be healthy, they need a good sugar content. And I'll be coming back to this multiple times during this talk. So I also wanted to talk about this. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, but I think it's a good review. This is the yearly cycle of the plant. And when we're talking about acclimation and winter injury, it's really important to keep this in mind. So there's the first stage, which is growth. That would be from bud set in the spring, and from bud break, in the spring. So I'm talking about half-inch green or something with apples, until the terminal bud sets in the middle of summer. So that's a growth phase. And one of the big things is the wood hasn't formed on the new growth. So it's really easy to prune at this time of year because you can use your fingernails. But the important part from this perspective is during this active growth phase, even apple leaves can be susceptible to temperature, really, just any kind of freezing temperatures. The apple trees are not frost tolerant at all. They're basically frost sensitive. And then this is one of the most critical times in the year for an apple tree. That would be terminal bud set. And that can happen in a young tree. It happens usually late July, sometimes as late as the middle of August. In a mature tree, it tends to be fairly early, usually early July. Late June is what I have here. And what's really critical when we're talking about freezing tolerance is from this terminal bud set, the branch gets more and more frost tolerant until I'm not using the term leaf abscission, or dormancy, I'm using the term leaf abscission. The reason why I'm not using the term dormancy here is because in some ways the plant is dormant at the end of August. It still has the leaves, but but in many respects it's already dormant. In fact, there's a specific term for this time that at least one of my professors always liked to use, called quiescence. But another thing that's really important about this time, this critical time, the pre-dormancy is what I call it, is you can actually cause the plant to start growing again. There's a number of ways you can do that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. One of the best ways to get the plant growing again is to remove all the leaves too early. And that's also, this is really critical. When you remove all the leaves, which nobody wants to do, by the way. I did that as part of my master's thesis, by the way. I went to these small cherry trees, and I removed every leaf on the tree. And what I found is that when I removed all the leaves in August, early August, the trees weren't very dormant, and so we got regrowth. When I removed the leaves at the end of September, the trees were a little more dormant, and they stayed, the terminal buds did not break at that point. But we did get regrowth when I removed them in August. So the plant becomes more and more dormant as we're going along here. By the way, every tree that I removed the leaves with died. So removing leaves, I'll point out, is one of the best ways to get winter injury. Now we have what we call I like to call it true dormancy. It's after leaf abscission, and this is the time when the chilling requirement is not met. And I'll talk a little bit about chilling requirement because everybody's interested in that. All the fruit growers are interested in that. But the important thing about this true dormancy is you can get 70 degrees, you can get a 50-degree overnight low, and the buds still don't break. The buds oftentimes don't even swell because it is truly dormant. But the other thing is, but if we have nice cold temperatures during this true dormancy period, that is when the tree is at its maximum hardiness. I have -20 here. It could be a -30 depending on the variety. So provided we have the right weather, we can get the trees fully hardy. So, and then we have late dormancy. This would be after the chilling requirement is met. And the problem with this point is every warm spell we get after the chilling requirement is met, that tree loses hardiness. And that's why a lot of you are, was anybody here really enjoying the warm weather recently? No. No, caused a lot of anxiety for you. Okay, so, but the big thing about late dormancy is if you get enough warm weather, even if it's too early, even if it is January 31st in Walla Walla, Washington, if the chilling requirement is met, the trees will start growing. And that's what killed the cherry trees. I think that's what killed the cherry trees in Flathead Lake that year in Montana. All the cherry trees died because the chilling requirement had been met several nights above 50 and hardiness was completely lost. So this becomes really important. Actually, I'm going to come back here because I just sent out my newsletter, which some of you have read. I won't quiz any of you. But one of the things I really emphasized is when we had all of this warm weather in February, all of the indicators I had suggested that the chilling requirement had not been met in apples. Somebody mentioned silver maple trees. Silver maple trees are very different. They actually bloom during dormancy. So you can actually have silver maples blooming in February, but even though and I saw this in Washington all the time, but even though they're blooming in January or February, that doesn't mean anything as far as your apples are concerned. The silver maples are on an entirely different schedule than your apples. And that's what killed us in 2012. 2012 overall was a milder winter, and so when we started getting 60-degree overnight lows in the middle of March, most of the trees already had their chilling requirement, and they started growing in the middle of March. So that's why I am still cautiously optimistic about this winter, even though the warm weather is causing a lot of you to lose sleep. So anybody seeing any swelling buds on any kind of fruit tree? Yeah?
Fireside primarily.
Fireside, okay. Yeah. Yeah, JP. Whitney crabs, okay. And that to me would suggest that Whitney crab might be a little lower chilling have a lower chilling requirement. And by the way, for the, I've been looking at, I'm also fascinated with dormancy, and from what I've seen in the orchards, Honeycrisp has a pretty high chilling requirement. We've actually run into low chill injury in Honeycrisp in Minnesota. Does that make sense to any of you? No. Okay, the reason why we had low chill injury, and I should point this out, chilling requirements are met when the temperature is between 32 and 50 degrees. There is no chilling units met when the temperature drops below freezing. And so how we ended up getting low chilling injury in Honeycrisp in 2010 is we had a typical winter. Most of it was typical, below freezing for extended periods of time. And it was actually about the 10th of March, it got really warm. And so we went from below freezing to 50 degrees. And it was really funny. I was out at one farm, and it was one time, I always have to be careful when I see a problem. It's like, oh no, this is Roundup injury. These Honeycrisp trees are dying. They're horrible. And then I went to the next farm. And by the way, some of these are your farms. And it was the Honeycrisp looked exactly the same. And then I went to the third farm, Sam Kadem. He is from Israel. And I said, Sam, what does low chill injury look like? And he described exactly what I had been seeing in the Honeycrisp. That year we had a cold, but this is Minnesota. We have warm snaps, we have cold snaps, and after the following cold snap, the Honeycrisp looked fine. It was actually a problem that only somebody like me would observe, because it only lasted about a week where we were having that problem. Then it got cold and the Honeycrisp just grew fine. So I bring this chilling requirement up just to kind of reassure you. I think we're still looking at a pretty good situation. And by the way, the apple crop in 1989 with very sensitive varieties like Golden Delicious, we still had a full apple crop. There were some king bloom that were killed in February, but not anything else. So, am I reassuring anybody about this spring? No? You still don't want to? There is a pretty good, I guess one thing I look at it is, since I moved here in 2000, there is a really good correlation between warm weather at the beginning of March and frost injury. Every year we've had warm weather at the beginning of March. There's been a problem with frost. But this year, the warm weather was in February. So that's why I'm still optimistic. So I know some of you aren't as optimistic as me, but that's fine. So, and one of the tricky things, so I did a fair amount of research on winter injury, and it's really difficult because the damage it says in this article from the Fruit Grower News, every freezing event is unique. And so we have different times it can happen. I'll go into a little more detail. First of all, it can happen in early winter. Then there's the one that everybody is familiar with, and that would be extreme cold. What was the coldest it got during the winter? This is the basis of the USDA plant hardiness zone. So extreme midwinter low temperatures. And by the way, there was a lot of 30 below in this state this year. Then there's the problem, which I keep mentioning, the fluctuating temperatures in midwinter. Even if the buds aren't swelling and you get a really high, say a 40-degree overnight low, even if the tree is in full dormancy, it is unfortunately going to be susceptible if the temperature suddenly drops to 10 below or so. And then also then there's after the buds start swelling. So we're not going to talk much. I'll talk a little bit about this, even though the buds aren't swelling. This is one of the most difficult parts of studying winter hardiness in woody plants, is we get winter injury in different tissues depending. I don't know why. I wish I had an answer to this. But a lot of my, I did a fair amount of lab research on winter hardiness, but where I get most of my information is going out to your orchards and looking at your trees. And one of the things I've found, actually even from 1989 going back to 1989, is sometimes the winter injury occurs in the wood. And this appears to be most common for that second type of winter injury, when the extreme cold and when the trees are at full hardiness. And a lot of times this is missed because the branch doesn't die right away. It usually sprouts. and then it leafs out, everything's fine, and then a hot spell comes, and the branch suddenly dies. And what I do is I go out when the branch suddenly dies, and I start cutting into bark, even though some people are uncomfortable with it. And this is what I find: dark cells in the center. So after the winter of 2009 or 8, 9, this is what I was finding: a lot of dead wood. And by the way, we were talking about preventing winter injury. Just to confirm some of the things that Larry and Eric were saying, I think this is really critical. By the way, how much, whether this is going to kill the branch or not, I think depends partly on the weather after the trees leaf out. So if there's hot weather right away, these wood cells are going to stop transporting water and things will collapse. If it's a cool spring, the trees recover from this much better. And by the way, this is also emphasizing what Larry and Eric have saying. This is when I think foliar feeding can work really well, because this branch sometimes can survive if it can start forming wood cells enough to get the plant through the first summer. And I have seen plants recover from injury that they shouldn't have. But again, looking at the symptoms, you can see this nice green bark, but the wood is dark. Sometimes it'll even be black, depending on the time of year. By the way, as a scientist, I'm still confused. Wood is mainly dead cells. Only like 10-15% of the cells in wood are alive. But this kind of winter injury is very common. Oh, the other thing I wanted to just bring up, this came up at a talk I gave 2 weeks ago, is this can look a lot like fire blight. And the branch suddenly dies and somebody says, oh, I got fire blight. But no, it's not fire blight, because in fire blight, it's actually the bark that dies. Here we're talking about the wood. And all you have to do is cut into any branch. And this, by the way, was a dead branch, is why I cut into it. And you'll see that dark colored bark. So, and then the most recent winter injury episode of winter injury, it actually appeared to be the bark. And then sometimes the branches die right away. Sometimes it takes until the middle of the summer. Sometimes I think it even takes 2 years for the branch to die, depending on how severely the bark was girdled. In 2012, this was real common. Sometimes the bark was dyed near the crotch where it's attached to the trunk. And there were a number of people noticed, if we had the last cold winter was in 2014, and then a lot of branches were dying in 2015. So with this type of winter injury, sometimes it takes more than 1 year for the branch to actually die. And then distinct, but this, I won't talk, I just wanted to mention this, there's the bark damage on the southwest side of the trunk. That can happen many times of winter, and that has nothing to do with foliar feeding. That's painting the trunks. It's a combination of sunlight and cold. But I did get somebody send me pictures of trees they were concerned about the bark dying. And that's the thing, the bark was dying. Oh no, I got fire blight. No, the bark was dying on the trunk on the southwest side of the tree. It's winter injury, it's not fire blight. And then this is something that I've become really interested in over the years, and that is spur death. And I like this because I can tell if the damage is severe or moderate. And so for almost 30 years now, I have been cutting apple spurs in early spring to estimate winter injury. I've never really read about it, by the way. It was just something I stumbled on, and I've always wondered, is there something to it? Well, actually, I know there is something to it, because once I was visiting a farm, and I was all ready to enroll them for the summer, I started cutting spurs. And I didn't know what to say other than I did not enroll them because the spurs were too dark. So this is an example here. The bark is alive, but the tip of the spur is pretty dark. I don't even know if this particular branch died. And what I was finding in 2012, or 2014, by the way, with this, is in some cases 50% of the spurs died, some cases more. So, and then on the bottom, this picture was taken at the same time as the last picture. I think this one, surprisingly, it was a Sweet 16, I think is what it was. So you'd think it would be a little more hardy. But on the bottom here, I show you the outside. And already you can see there's something different because this spur is starting to sprout. This is a chestnut, so chestnut crab. It's always good to compare chestnut crab with everything else because they are just a phenomenally hardy tree. So not many of you are doing stone fruit, but I do want to mention this because stone fruit assessing winter injury is phenomenally easy because you take the bud, you take a flower bud, and flower buds are distinct in stone fruit, and you cut it in half, and if everything is green in the center like this, it's fine. If it's black in the center, it's not, it's dead. This used to be much easier when I was in my 30s, but as I've gotten older, especially with pie cherries and plums, it's much harder because the plums have very small buds and it's hard to see if there's a little black spot in the center. So in the middle of winter, if this happens, by the way, there's no bloom. If it happens later on, the flower will actually open, but it'll be black inside. And this is one of the most aggravating parts of growing fruit, is we have these plants that are very frost tolerant. They can handle a lot of things. This is 0.1% of the plant material. But if you're growing peaches or cherries, that is all of your income. So it doesn't matter if everything else is fine. If all of your buds look like that, you won't have any crop. So from a scientific point of view, this was really frustrating for me because when I was really looking at this in the 1990s, I forgot to tell you, one of the fascinating things about the early 90s, I wanted to study winter injury. Why are you doing that? There's global warming happening. Winter injury is going to be a thing of the past. And my thought was, well, if there is global warming, I could actually see winter injury becoming more common. So I just wish we knew more about it. But then one of the aggravating things about this is when I was doing extensive literature searches on winter injury, at one point, 80% of all of the literature on winter injury concerned peach buds. And that's because it's a very simple system. You're not talking about, well, is it the wood cells that are dying? Is it the bark cells? You're talking about a couple of very simple cells, the ovaries. And this, by the way, is one reason why we don't know much, is everybody's been emphasizing stone fruit buds, and we're forgetting the larger picture. So anyway, 2014 was, I took this as, I had a grant that helped me work on this. I wanted to find out, I've been cutting spurs for 2.5 decades, but does it really mean anything? And so I went out to many orchards and I started cutting spurs. I ranked all of the orchards on a scale of 0 to 3. 0 meaning I wasn't finding any colored tissue. All the tissue was green within the spur. 3 means basically there were a significant number of dead spurs. Not all the spurs were dead, but it was over 50%. And one guy said, well, why do you cut spurs? I've cut spurs in the past and it doesn't tell me anything. Well, to me it was really good because what I found is if there was real minor browning, which I called a 1, the crop was normal. And that means that a lot of these plants can handle a fair amount of winter injury and still get a normal crop. But where it was 2, Yeah, there was crop losses and occasional branch death, and where it was 3, it was a disaster. And the disaster became worse and worse over time. It just didn't get any better. So this was Honeycrisp, and in that particular winter, and most winters I find, Zestar was significantly better. By the way, we don't always see this. This really shocked me, where there is a real difference between southern Minnesota and northern Minnesota. We don't always see that, by the way. Sometimes, yeah, but that happened in 2014. And by the way, this would be about a number 2 as far as winter injury on this Zestar spur. So I like this information. I am able to predict injury just by cutting the spurs. And what does that say about, is this what you've seen about Zestar and Honeycrisp? Hardier than, yeah. And Minnieska. Does anybody know where that fits? Zestar, Honeycrisp?
Better than both.
Better than both, absolutely. And I have seen that, David, in 20 orchards. I've seen that over 3 or 4 winters where there was damage in orchards across the state. Oh, yeah, Eric.
So if you had cut that other spur, would you have seen the same thing in it? So it doesn't matter which leader you cut? Or?
Yeah, there will be variation between spurs, absolutely. Yeah. But anyway, this is what I do. So, yeah, I do think it's important that people know that the Minnieska is, yeah, that's one of the nice things about it. It is a hardy tree. Yeah.
It is good. And like that, it's opening. It looks like will that heal itself in time?
Yes, it will heal itself in time. In this particular case, yes. Yeah, it's fairly severe winter injury, but it's not so bad. Actually the bud is sprouting, so you know that it has a potential. And whether or not it heals itself on time depends on the weather, depends on a lot of other things. The worst scenario for weather for something like this would be 90 degrees the 15th of May, okay? But if it's cool weather, it's much more likely to heal itself. So real good question, Stuart. I have to think about that. But I feel comfortable, doing and babying the trees, doing a lot of things when you have this situation, I think is always a good idea. So I'm going to go through the different types of winter injury. So one is early winter injury, and this is one of the issues is if we have delayed terminal bud set. And when I was looking at, I went to a national conference about winter injury or cold hardiness and all of this, and at least in the 90s, they attributed all of the differences in cold hardiness between varieties to when a plant set its terminal buds. But in this climate, we know that if a tree sets terminal bud after about the middle of August, the chance of it dying in the winter is really high. And generally what we're aiming for is 3 feet of growth in this climate. Otherwise, a little more, much more than 3 feet of growth, and the trees will start, are more susceptible to winter injury, especially in a year like this, where it's been cold but not real cold. The other thing I've never quite figured out, every species I've looked at, the year after planting, the trees are most susceptible to winter injury. And that's what happened here. This, by the way, is, I believe, is wood injury, because look at the growth at the bottom there below the snow line. Look at the growth up here. So it's non-lethal injury, but it's really stunted that tree. Actually, I think I just cut this tree off because it just wasn't growing. The other thing that's, I'm sure many of you have thought, yeah, David.
Can you avoid that period of susceptibility by planting sleeping eyes or perhaps budding the orchard?
I think these are, I have no idea. So I'm open to any suggestions on that. that is a really good suggestion there, yeah. And then the other problem we'll run into is, I've seen many times, is a tree, a honeycrisp especially, dies down to snow level, and then it grows really fast the next year, and then it's really susceptible to winter injury the following year. And so sometimes people lose their trees completely because it gets caught in this cycle. And actually, in some cases, I recommend even covering the trees that second year when you have, say, a 4-foot shoot from a tree that died down to snow level. So the winter after this was really mild, and so we didn't get that. In fact, at Staples, there's been a number of cases where the trees eventually survived even though they had died down to snow level a couple of times. Then we get, and then after 2 years, for whatever reason, the trees tend to be much hardier. And David, if I was younger, I would experiment with that, but maybe I should submit a grant, overcoming this problem. But everything is different. But this is so consistent with these young trees. This is the other thing that becomes really important is winter injury, if the leaves are killed prior to leaf abscission. And when that happens, it just dramatically increases the susceptibility of the tree. And this might have been a contributing factor to the winter injury with honeycrisp in 2014. For some reason, across the state, the trees were holding on to their leaves fairly late in the winter, or fairly late in the fall. So, I thought I should put this up. Critical temperatures. This isn't in your handout, by the way. I put this on last night. Critical temperatures as buds swell. At Silvertip, for 10% kill, it's actually 15 degrees. And then for 90% kill, by the way, this would be unacclimated trees. If you have 2 days of below freezing weather before it gets this cold, the trees will be better acclimated. 90% kill is 2 degrees. So again, I'm trying to reassure you that you'll have a nice crop this year because we have not gotten that cold. Nobody's at Silvertip, are they? I've seen the buds swell, but not actually get to Silvertip. And this becomes the real take-home message, my first take-home message, this is going to be my biggest take-home message, is if we delay terminal bud set, then the trees are going to be more susceptible to winter injury. So for 100 years, people have said that if there's too much nitrogen, it's going to delay terminal bud set, and the trees are going to be more susceptible to winter injury. And that's definitely true, but the fact is, I've never seen it. I've never seen high nitrogen lead to winter injury. I've seen a lot of different things. The one I just mentioned is when the tree dies down to 2 inches, and then it grows, and then it's really susceptible to winter injury. Those trees weren't even fertilized, but the tree wanted to grow. So everybody here has heard this, but one of the things I do want to emphasize is plants with I have seen this multiple times. Plants with nutrient deficiencies are more susceptible to winter injury. And this becomes a problem too when I look at a farm and, what's wrong? And it's September and the trees just don't look right. It's probably too late at that point. This might be going a little against what a lot of you have heard all of your lives, but I'll go into a little more detail on this in a minute. So, by the way, most of the slides are Del Christensen's from here on. Also, I don't want to make sure I'm not too late for your break. Okay, we're doing fine. This is really important. Carbohydrates. This is why it's so important to have healthy trees. Trees are just like bears, except they need to store up energy to survive through the winter and to care for their offspring. And their offspring are going to be the developing flower buds inside the plant. And we want the plant to be at a full carbohydrate status when it goes into dormancy. And when that happens, the trees are going to be more resistant to any kind of stress that you're going to put on it. And Del put in this that there's these things called sugar alcohol, sorbitol is the primary one. And there's long been, this has long been theorized that the sorbitol in apples and cherries actually happens at an antifreeze, but at a very, very micro level. We're talking about inside the cells. And, you know, again, trees that are overcropped, they are going to be more susceptible to winter injury. And, you know, I'm saying this several times, any mineral nutrient deficiency will reduce cold hardiness. So, calcium. And low calcium trees will be more susceptible to winter injury. Unfortunately, I was not able to look up this study, but you know, and this happened at the Tree Fruit Research Laboratory in Wenatchee. This was after the freeze. Excuse me. I've seen that, by the way. We had a rootstock trial in Staples, and I'm sorry, Larry, but I did not take a tissue analysis. I was running low on money, and for this project, we had some trees on Antonovka, new trees on Antonovka, and they were one reason why I didn't take the nutrient analysis, tissue analysis, is they were deficient on everything. And yes, Larry, I should have been doing foliar sprays on those trees that were deficient on everything. It's just horrible looking on these Antonovka rootstocks. And by the way, I had these Antonovka on two sides of the orchard. It was not a microclimate or anything. Both sides of the opposite sides of the orchard, they both looked horrible nutrient deficiencies. So, and phosphorus, yeah, this is important. Phosphorus does play a really strong role in helping. Actually, well, I'll go in a little more detail. We're going back to that cell membrane. The phosphorus is an integral part of the cell membrane, and if that cell membrane is tough, then it is going to be more resistant to winter injury. Copper, yeah, really copper deficient plant is going to have extremely low, it's going to have poor growth, and then again, it's going to be susceptible to winter injury. Copper deficient, and this is more likely to happen in gravel soils, sometimes even in highly organic soils. And if you don't have enough potassium, again, you are going to be more susceptible to winter injury. And of course, this can happen if you have a heavy crop, because the crop is a really big sink. It's starting to, and so the plant actually starts taking phosphorus out of the leaves and actually putting them in the crop. So we'll go, and then magnesium. Yeah, I love this. Yeah, you're going to get, if you have a magnesium deficiency, which Erica has been talking about. Small spurs, weak growth. And then again, we're going back to that reduced carbohydrate supply. So magnesium requirements also become, if you have high potassium, as Eric was just talking about, if you have high potassium, you're going to need more magnesium. But it's the nutrient that I'm more interested in is nitrogen. I wanted to go a little more into detail on this. One of the things with if you have a nitrogen deficient tree, and I have seen this, I've seen this quite a bit actually. Yeah, oftentimes in one case I saw some Honeycrisp trees in the metro area that stopped growing at the end of in mid-June. That doesn't do you any good. These were young trees, by the way. They were in the ground. It was their second leaf. They stopped growing in mid-June. But the leaves weren't very healthy, and those trees, because they had stopped growing too early, were probably more susceptible to winter injury because everything was off balance in those trees. So, yeah, I mentioned the excessive nitrogen. And then there's another thing that Del put in here that I think is important. I've seen this a number of times. It's not really a nutrition issue, but when you get a dry spell, especially in early June, sometimes the plant the tree will stop growing. It'll set terminal buds early, and then you get rain in July, the tree will start growing again. That's not a good situation to be in. What I'm finding in those situations, in some cases the trees will survive, or sometimes the shoots will survive, sometimes they won't, depending on how cold it gets. But by the way, this is one of the most common causes of trees growing after terminal bud set is an early drought followed by midsummer rains. The other reason why we get trees growing is if the deer are doing late summer pruning. Never a good idea. Yeah, it's amazing. Deer are really good at making trees susceptible to winter injury. They're just
That is winter injury.
yeah. No, but even if they're not coming, yeah, I'm not. Dan's talking about deer as winter injury, but I'm talking about a little different. It's where they strip all the leaves off, they cause the plants to start growing. So generally, so we want good growth. We want healthy trees. You cannot get more hardiness by starving trees. That's one thing I'm going to keep emphasizing. Yeah.
On the last item there, are you talking about nitrogen applied foliar?
Both.
And why would you apply it after terminal set?
Actually, there's a number of reasons. So he's jumping ahead of me, but that's important. No, this is actually really important. This is actually one of the more important things I wanted to say. Is this actually started in the 80s or 90s, where people started looking at actually doing a late fall nitrogen. But actually it's both. So let's say late September, so we're talking a long time after terminal bud set. I would say both. You can apply foliar nitrogen or through the roots. And so in some parts of the country, a September soil nitrogen application has become standard. So
what's the benefit? Because that's sort of counter to what I've learned.
Okay, and the benefit is when that tree starts growing in the spring, the nitrogen it's in the trunk at that point. So a lot of the nitrogen is being absorbed in the fall. When the tree starts growing in that spring, the nitrogen's right there, giving it more strength. And as far as foliar, the best example, and I'm glad you brought this up, is a foliar urea spray in late fall in order to reduce a scab inoculum. And actually, I do have a grower who's been doing that for several years, doing a October urea spray, and it hasn't hurt their trees at all. Yeah.
I heard some research with cherry trees that after the leaves were about 5% yellow in the fall, it would spray urea on it and to ensure a better bud set, flower bud set. So I don't know how that equates to apples, but the stone fruit set.
Yeah, and that's actually, with stone fruit, one of the things I didn't mention, it's really important, is you have all these flower buds, which you can see, by the way, in September and October. They're really easy to see on a cherry or a plum. And, but it doesn't say how strong that flower bud is. And if you have weak flower buds, a lot of times they'll sprout, they won't set. And the frustrating thing is, it's early May and all of a sudden the fruit is dropping off. Sometimes it actually had to do that the buds were weak from the previous fall. Yeah, Stuart.
And on the strawberries, they recommend fall application of nitrogen also.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, what, 5 pounds per acre?
Yes.
What do they suggest for apples?
It's about the same. Yeah, and that would be for apple scab control, reducing apple scab inoculum. Yeah, so yeah, this is good. I'm glad I wanted to get some strong negative reactions. So, but the critical thing is going back to that year in the tree is we're talking about getting closer to leaf abscission when the plant is more dormant. You wouldn't want to do this in early August. I would never do this in early August because that's when you run the risk of causing the tree to start growing again. So actually, Eric, I think we're, yeah. In your handout, it talks about some of the other zinc, real critical. Yeah, it's amazing what zinc deficiency does as far as poor shoot growth. Sometimes you get these little tiny shoots. They're a little bit deformed, and yeah, absolutely, those are going to be more susceptible to winter injury. Boron too, absolutely. Boron is similar to calcium. It's taken up with calcium, and I like this. Essential for root development, necessary for nutrient uptake. So it's break time, and excuse me. Yeah, this will be the last slide. Boron. Boron is active in sugar transport. And again, that sugar becomes an antifreeze at the cellular level. That helps make your trees survive some of the nasty weather we've had lately. And it's active with calcium transfer and metabolism. So boron is absolutely critical. And then Del mentioned fall apogee, which I found interesting. I don't even know what to think about this, but apogee does reduce growth. And is that good? Well, it depends on whether you need more growth or not. So I just have it in there. And then the last few slides are Del's post-harvest spraying program, which I think this is important. So any other questions, or do you all need to get your cup of coffee?
Yeah, I had a question. So a couple of years ago, I had customers that, I can't remember exactly what the circumstance was, but they made a fall application, post-harvest application, and their goal was try to defoliate. I know they weren't putting on, like a burn down type herbicide or anything, but they weren't trying to get the trees to defoliate, and they kept saying that, we wanted to go into dormancy earlier. But so based on what you were saying earlier, trying to force the tree to defoliate before it really wants to is actually detrimental to winter hardiness.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And yeah, in Washington, I think they often do that. The nursery industry does that, but they're putting everything into cold storage. They don't have to worry about zero degree. And this is really critical, is because I'm looking at dormancy and leaf abscission as an internal thing that the plant is controlling, and they're trying to do external things to make the plant go dormant, and it just, no. I've always been interested, maybe there is a hormone that you could possibly spray to increase that, but as far as ripping the leaves off, everything I've seen says no. Okay, thanks for helping me emphasize that.
Thank you, Ed. That is.
The problem that we have is sometimes we have a good thing going and we pound it into the ground, and then they say, well, they never would shut off and go away, so we don't want to make you feel that way. We hopefully, we were going to do something more extensive, but I think we'll just kind of summarize the day. And if you have any special questions or comments, we'll take those and try to answer those, and then we'll let you be dismissed. Again, I want to thank you for coming. And if you sign up this little sheet, and actually it says hops growers, so I don't think there's too many hops growers in here, but a few. If you would, when you leave, turn in your turn in your registration, and if you would, also your badge. We're recycling those, and tomorrow we have about 70 small fruit growers coming, strawberry, raspberry, blackberry, wine grapes, coming for another day of seminar. I know we spent a lot of time on sap testing, and we're on a big learning curve with this technology, and we want to kind of inform you. Some of you people are very key in helping us utilize this technology and make it effective for our growers and our customers and clients. So we did a lot of teaching on that. Probably in the future, we will just use the technology and give you the forms, and we won't emphasize it, but we feel like it's important for you to understand what this technology is, how it can be used to improve your fruit quality, your yield quality, and how it really, I think we're really emphasizing balancing those trees out, to look at a balance from the beginning through the end, to keep it in that line. And we definitely have learned some new things, and as we address programs for the coming year based on this information and your information, if you did the sap testing last year, we feel like we need to make some adjustments. I mean, we thought, well, we pretty much know where we should be going, and that's true, but there might be a tweak or two here that we want to do. So if you wonder, should I be changing my program or should I be tweaking my fertility plan that we've given you, please ask us. We want to review it and readdress it, and particularly as Eric had graphed this out and we saw these patterns of nutrients falling off at the end, my big question is, we have a good soil fertility plan. Why isn't the soil supporting what we're trying to finish here at the end? Why are we seeing this decline in nutrients? But maybe sometimes we are backing off on the soil. For example, my experience in the greenhouse is that they are root feeding with Biomax, with NPK, with micronutrients all the way through production. They never back off on feeding the soil. And so when you look at one of their sap tests, you see that nutrients, you don't see the things dropping off as dramatically as what we did in some of our reports that we've gotten back. So I'm starting to think, maybe sometimes a mid-season biostimulation of the soil and activation of the soil is a good thing. So we've done some of that, particularly in the sap testing growers in the greenhouse, and I have a grape grower in Nebraska who has a drip irrigation, and they did sap testing last year. And so they continued to feed through the drip system even in late season. And it showed up pretty dramatically in terms of consistent nutrient levels. They didn't fall off as dramatically.
How often do you feed? Every week, every other week, or?
Some things every week, weekly. But when they'd get the sap test back and it was low in manganese, it was a little gal, assistant, she's managing the vineyard, she would put 2 quarts of manganese through the drip, and 2 weeks later, we see the needle move. So what I'm saying is, if you have a irrigation system and you can inject nutrients, it's an easy way to keep tweaking that system and keep tweaking that system all the way through, and maybe not have a drop-off that we've seen. So I raise that. I mean, that's something that we need to be aware of and address and be thinking about. Anyway, it does, in my mind, it does point up what Thaddeus has said, and what Dell preaches too, is that post-harvest feeding is critical for good overwintering and good production the coming year. So we want to really emphasize that again and bring that to the light. So anybody question and comment about today?
High marks for the lunch and snacks.
They treat us right. I'm pleased with how well they do. Thank you. Anything else besides good food? That's a sign of a farmer, you know.
Lots of food for thought.
Lots of food for thought. That's true. A lot of information.
You work on Dr. Harry's working there?
The last I heard, he was working on rice. He was working on rice in the Philippines. So I have no, right now, I don't know, no. Anybody else have something to contribute or question or, so our whole point of doing this is to bring you this information, but make it practical and helpful. And you know, we're not trying to overwhelm you, but we want you to have good information so you can make good decisions on your cropping situation, the variety, the rootstock, the issues that you're challenged with, whether it be disease issues or whatever. I think our experience is when we work with the very intentional growers that follow the program and do all of that, Agro-K products work very, very well. You get it in on the right time, you see very positive results. And if you miss timings and it's like, well, maybe I'll get to it, and it's still in the garage or it's still in the chemical shed, I haven't gotten it on yet, you know, it just doesn't perform in the shed. You've got to have it on the crop or on the trees. So intentional management, and I commend you for that. I commend you for being interested to come out and educate yourself and learn what we're trying to do, but also in terms of your management practices. You know, Del, he's going to be back on his feet here shortly, and he loves to field calls and help you, and I and Eric, and there's several of us questions. Alex, if you have a compatibility question or can I mix this together, we have resources to get you an answer. So don't hesitate. Send an email or call or whatever.
Question, I didn't hear much about any fresh ideas on what 2 or 3 days of sustained winds above freezing, like they were, 40, 50 miles an hour, is that going to do anything to freeze?
Haven't seen that before?
Not like what I saw.
You want something to swear or want to put it in?
One guy actually said, "Oh, I removed the straw."
I will tell you, I've been trying to get ready for this seminar, and the last few days I've been getting phone calls from. I have customers in Oklahoma and Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and they're all in a panic. Their peaches are in full bloom, and Saturday night it's supposed to be 25 degrees and snow, and so they're stressed about how they're going to get through this. Raspberry and blackberry growers too. It's just a lot of. They're at least 2-3 weeks ahead of where they normally are, and that's what they're facing this weekend.
Yeah, Larry, any production or inventory issues that we should be aware of, or are you going to have a good supply of all your products in the growing season?
We're going to have a very good supply of all our products. No problem on that. One day here a couple weeks ago, we sent 8 truckloads to California. Why? Because rain, and they had a window of 3 or 4 days where they could spray, And they cleared out our warehouse. We have 3 warehouses in California, and few days that was all gone. So we had to ship 8 truckloads to replenish that warehouse, so that they had, that's like almonds were the big one that they just couldn't spray because it was so wet. And then they did get this window, and they were spraying by helicopter and drone and everything possible just to get it on. So no problem with product.
The question was raised about wind and winter injury, and this, a lot of people wonder about this. I was involved in a grape breeding program for many years, and the material had quite a wide range. It was more susceptible to winter damage than apples are, certainly by far. And one year, I don't know, maybe it was the 80s or early 90s, we had 3 nights where the temperature got down to 34 below zero, accompanied by very strong winds. And there was remarkably little winter injury in the population that year. And I quit worrying about winds being associated.
Yeah, so he was actually the speaker at one of the speakers at the Nebraska Grape Growers, talking about some of the new varieties and things that he's been working on, and he mentioned that he had worked with you. So wind chill factor is not a factor in
my experience, it was not in the initial grapes.
That's good to know. See, when you look at the Farmer's Almanac, it says that we don't have to worry that temperatures in March here are going back to normal, and we had all this warm February weather, but according to the Farmer's Almanac, we have no worries. Just like Thaddeus said, no worries.
I wouldn't go
down. All right. Well, anybody else? Thank you for your attention and your business, and I want to just really tell you that we feel like we're in a partnership, and we want to work with you and support you in every way we can to give you the most help and make this crop, your production, as highest quality, the best yield that you can. And all the issues that we have to deal with, we know that it's not easy. It's a lot of hard work. So thank you again for coming, and have a successful season. Thank you.